Lamplight Whispers, journeying with you through the river of time. Tonight, row with us to the sweltering shores of the East Sea in the Shang Dynasty to see why the red silk ribbon that shook the Dragon Palace could never bind together a broken family. It's late at night. Outside, the wind brushes past the roof tiles, and inside, just one small light remains. The candle wick crackles softly, and our story tonight begins right here, in this little spark of flame. If you're already in bed, tuck yourself in cozy and warm. Don't rush off to sleep just yet. Listen to the ocean waves, the wind, and the sound of a child riding in on wheels of fire. In the old stories of China, there was a young boy who caused terrible trouble. Heaven and earth both came hunting for him. His name was Nezha, the fiercest boy in all the old legends. When they came to take his life, he didn't run. First, he destroyed his own mortal body, then was reborn from a lotus blossom. When he opened his eyes again, he was still Nezha, but far more powerful than before. I love his story, not just for his magical weapons or because he dared to fight the Dragon Palace, but because he did something that few people ever dare to do, even when they grow up. He took back his fate, piece by piece, from those who tried to control it. There was no applause on that road, just the cold shine of a sword, water drops on lotus leaves, and dust upon his shoes. His father, Li Jing, was a general of the Shang Dynasty, guarding Chentang Pass. Outside the pass lay the ocean, and flags fluttered on the fortress walls. Whenever the wind blew, the heavy cloth beat against the brick all night long. Expecting a child is always a joyful thing, but this baby stayed in his mother's womb for 3 years and 6 months. Spring flowers bloomed and faded, and the trees in the courtyard added layer after layer of growth. On the day he was born, the sky turned dark, then bright again. The bronze bells under the eaves rang out, though no one touched them. Far out at sea, the water churned as if a giant fish were passing deep below. Inside the room, there was no sound of a baby crying. What hit the floor first was a round ball of flesh rolling across the stone tiles. His father drew his sword and sliced it open, and out jumped a chubby, healthy little boy. In his hand, the boy held his golden ring. Around his waist was tied a bright red sash. The ring gleamed cold, but the sash burned like fire. Later on, he'd ride his wind-fire wheels, bringing a warm breeze wherever he went. With all those treasures, he looked like a born warrior. But powerful as he was still just a child, with chubby cheeks, short little fingers, and feet that couldn't even reach the floor when he sat down. And like any little kid, he was curious. If he saw a bird in a tree, he had to chase it into the branches. If he saw clouds over the wall, he wanted to know what was hiding behind them. He just couldn't sit still for long. He loved to run all around the town and out past the gates, over the cobblestones and through the wet sand. Sometimes he'd fling his red sash into the air, making it spin in a big circle right over his head. When the sash came drifting down, it raised a puff of dust. The guards at the gate would step back out of the way, and the bread seller would cover his basket. But the boy just stood there in the wind, laughing bright and clear. It was a sweltering summer day. The sun had baked the beach sand white and hot underfoot. Ocean waves rolled in one after another, leaving soft white foam against the rocks. He ran down to the water and dipped his red sash into the sea. At first, he only gave it a gentle flick. Small ripples spread across the water, and a few little fish darted away into the rocks. But that red sash was no ordinary cloth. As he swished it a few more times, the water near the shore began to swirl. The waves rolled higher and higher, and a deep rumble echoed from the bottom of the sea. Deep under the eastern sea, inside the Dragon Palace, the pearl curtains started swaying. Dust drifted down from the stone pillars, wine cups clinked on the tables, and the seagrass outside flattened to the ocean floor. Hearing the commotion, the Dragon King sent his third son, Prince Aobing, to check it out. The sea parted before him, and the armored young prince rode the waters all the way to the shore. They were both young and both quick to anger. One demanded he stop at once. The other just wanted to play by the sea. A few harsh words passed, and neither was willing to back down. Their weapons clashed. The sound of metal rang over the water and echoed off the city walls, scaring away the shorebirds. Red sash swept through the waves, and the golden ring flashed brightly. A young child doesn't know his own strength. He only thought of pushing his opponent back. But as his palms struck out, the sea wind suddenly died, and the sand beneath his feet caved in. After that single blow, Aobing never stood up again. The tide washed over his armor and pulled back into the sea. On the shore, nothing was left but weapons, wet sand, and a long watermark. They say when a child brings disaster, he acts like he's only 3 years old. At 3, you don't realize how many doors slam shut after one strike, or how many people will come seeking blood. The shore fell quiet for a moment. Then, dark clouds gathered in the distance. The waves crashed back down, heavier than before, pounding against the rocks and the seawall of Chentang Pass. Grieving his son, the Dragon King's fury rose straight to the heavens. He vowed to take his complaint to the gods, demanding that Chentang Pass hand over the killer. If they refused, the whole Li family would suffer. The clouds hung low and heavy. Looking up, the townsfolk saw only darkness at the edge of the sky. Before the door lanterns could even be lit, wind swept down the streets, blowing away fallen leaves and paper offerings. Yet, the coldest part of this story isn't the Dragon King's rage. It's the father standing in the main hall. Listening to the news, the first thing he looked at was not his child's face. He looked first at the city walls, at his official seal, and at the rest of his family in the room. All of it weighed on him like a stone. Only at the very last did his gaze finally fall upon the boy. Li Qīng wasn't a bad man. He'd guarded the pass for years and knew the weight of rules and duty. But to him, his family, his people, and his post all mattered more than one son's hurt. He sent for the boy. In the main hall, the incense was only half burned, its ash drooping low. His father sat right in the center, hands pressed against the table, knuckles tight. He said, "You've brought terrible trouble upon us. The Dragon Palace won't let this go, and heaven will demand answers. If you want to save our family and protect Chentang Pass, you must go out there and take the blame yourself." His words fell heavy in the quiet room. The boy stood near the door, dried sea salt still clinging to his clothes. He looked down at his hands and didn't argue. He looked back up at his father. Behind him, the weapon rack was polished bright, spears lined up side by side. But that familiar face felt farther away than the tip of any spear. He was silent for a long time. Outside, a servant walked past, stepping on a dry leaf. His mother stayed in her room, with only the faint rustle of her dress against the curtain giving her away. He thought of his mother's hands combing his hair, hands that touched his forehead and changed cool cloths when he had a fever. The water in the bronze basin always smelled faintly of medicine. He thought of his two older brothers, too, coming home from practice, leaning their wooden swords against the wall, saving the last piece of candy for him. 3 little bowls, always sitting at the table. If he didn't step forward, those bowls might all be shattered. His mother's door would be broken down, his brothers dragged away, and the banner on the city wall might fall into the sea. He stood there, picturing it all, his small hands clenched into fists, then let go. At last, he turned and walked out the door. He didn't cry, and he didn't beg. A wind rose in the courtyard. Bamboo leaves pressed against the stone steps, and a single yellow leaf floated in the water tub. He stood in the middle of the yard and asked them to bring him a sword. As the blade slipped from its sheath, a cold gleam lit his face. He looked at his parents and said, "This body came from you. Today, I give it back. From this moment on, we are strangers." These were not the angry words of a child. He spoke clearly, every word calm and steady. No one in the courtyard moved. Even the guards at the gate lowered their heads. First, he cut away his flesh to return it to his mother. "This was from Mother," he said, "so I give it back to Mother." Blood dripped from the sword, falling into the cracks between the stone tiles. His mother reached out, then froze. Her sleeves trembled terribly, but there was nothing for her to catch. The wind drifted through the yard, and the tea on the stone table had gone completely cold. Next, he carved out his bones to return them to his father. "This was from Father," he said, "so I give it back to Father." His father gripped the scabbard, the veins bulging on the back of his hand. No one stepped in to stop him. No one said, "That is enough." Inside the hall, a long coil of incense ash broke at last, falling into the burner with a tiny, quiet thud. When his body fell, only a faint spirit was left in the courtyard. It had no feet and no shadow. The night wind lifted it up, carrying it over the rooftops toward the distant mountains. Investiture of the Gods is full of great battles and a sky full of gods. But the hardest thing to watch isn't the clash of weapons. It's a child taking himself apart right in front of his parents. Those hands were meant for grabbing candy or tugging on his mother's sleeve. But now they held a sword, returning every piece of flesh and bone that belonged to his parents. It was like settling an old debt. He gave his flesh back to his mother, his bones to his father, and took all the blame for himself. After this, he owed nothing for his body, and he'd never bring trouble to his family again. This was more than just standing up to them. Rebellious acts still hope for a second look, but Nezha went further. He cut every last tie, leaving only his wandering spirit drifting in the wind. The old stories don't always agree on how old he was. Some say he was 3, others say 7. But whichever it was, he was still just a child. As his spirit drifted over the town, the city gates were already shut. Warm lamplight shone through the paper windows. Every family was having dinner, but he had no body to go home to. The wind carried him along mountain paths. Dew glittered on the pine needles, but the wild grass couldn't even brush his clothes. He heard the bells of a mountain temple, but he couldn't reach out to open a door. At last, he drifted before his master. Taiyi Genren looked at the faint spirit and stood silent for a long time. Then, he simply trimmed the lamp on his desk to make the light a little brighter. The lamplight couldn't catch the boy's face, showing only a soft, pale shadow. His master let out a quiet sigh. He stood up and walked toward the lotus pond behind the mountain. The water was quiet and still. Moonlight fell between the leaves, and a few frogs hid under the weeds. A gentle night breeze made the big leaves brush against each other with a soft rustle. He picked fresh lotus leaves from the pond, then chose a few blossoms in full bloom. Their leaves were crisp, and the petals were wet with dew, each tiny drop catching the pale moonlight. Lotuses grow from the mud, roots deep in the dark, but their flowers stand clean above the water. Not a speck of dirt touches the petals, only fresh air and night dew. It was perfect for building him a new body. The master spread out the lotus leaves. He used the petals for bones and the roots for a body. Magic glowed softly from his hands, sending ripples across the pond as the fish hid beneath the leaves. The petals slowly closed like a little white door. Inside, a breath softly began. Then, a heartbeat. Quiet at first, but growing clearer with every beat. Just before dawn, the lotus opened once more. A young boy stood up from the flower, water droplets clinging to his feet. A gentle morning breeze blew his hair across his shoulders. He was a little taller now, his back straight and strong. His arms were no longer soft like a child's, and that familiar power gathered in his hands once again. In his hand was the universe ring, its golden edge catching the morning light. The red sash wrapped around his waist, bright as the rising sun. And by the pond, his fire wheels waited. As he stepped onto the wheels, 2 bright flames burst across the water. The heat blew away the dew, the lotus leaves bowed, and the mountain mist parted to clear a path. But what was truly different wasn't his height or even his power. In this new body, there was no flesh or blood from his parents. Not a single drop of his old self remained. His old body was carried by his mother for 10 months and bore his father's name. This new body was born of lotus blossoms, roots, and magic. He looked down at his hands. The lines were still there, his fingers curling into a firm fist. But this time, no one could ever say, "I gave you your life, so you must obey me." This life woke up from the pond water. No family tree, no ancestral debts, no broken incense on an altar. For the very first time, he stood between heaven and earth, purely as himself. After he was reborn, he didn't run away. Stepping onto his fire wind wheels, he headed straight back to Chentang Pass. As the town walls drew near, the guard flags snapped straight in the hot wind. Hearing the roar of fire, people on the street rushed behind closed doors. An old tea vendor held tight to his teacup lids, while children peeked through window cracks, watching two streaks of flame zip down the long street. He stopped outside his old family home. The door knockers were the same brass rings as before. By the steps, his tiny footprints were still there, only now they were covered in a layer of dust. He hadn't come back to kill his father. If he only wanted revenge, he could have used his golden ring long ago. He was here to finish what he'd left unsaid that day and say it to his face. Standing in the courtyard, he called out, "I gave you back my flesh and blood, but my soul is my own. From this day on, my life belongs to me, not to anyone else." His father stepped out from the main hall, still wearing his old armor. The clanking plates sounded cold and sharp. He couldn't accept a son disowning his father, and he certainly wouldn't tolerate this defiance. The two stared at each other across the stone steps. One held a long spear. The other wore a golden ring around his wrist. Hot gusts of wind whirled fallen leaves around the courtyard, tumbling between them. His father struck first, driving his spear straight for the boy's chest. But the boy kicked his fire wheels and leaped right over the eaves. His red sash unfurled in the air, wrapping tightly around a stone pillar. The golden ring flew through the air, clashing against the spear. Sparks showered onto the ground, scorching a few leaves black. The loud clang of weapons echoed over the high walls, carrying halfway down the street. They fought from the courtyard, out past the city gates, and from the top of the walls right up into the clouds. The fire wheels left long trails of flame across the sky, while the spear blocked the golden ring again and again. That fight went on for a long time. The father couldn't let his son escape his control, and the boy refused to ever go back to that old table, bowing his head and obeying orders. Later, Lord Lao stepped in and gave the father a golden pagoda. It wasn't big. Held in the palm of his hand, it glowed with a soft golden light, with tiny bronze bells hanging from its corners. This pagoda was made specifically to tame spirits. Throw it into the air, open its doors, and the boy would be pulled right inside. No matter how fast his fire wheels flew, he couldn't escape that golden light. From then on, whenever father and son met, weapons and the pagoda stood between them. The boy wanted to fight the moment he saw his father. The father raised the pagoda the second he saw his son. Neither was willing to back down first. They didn't make peace right away. Old wounds aren't healed just by calling yourselves father and son. And the blood-stained brick in the courtyard would never fade back to its original color on its own. This standoff lasted all through the War of the Investiture of the Gods. Only when the great battle ended and the gods took their places did things finally calm down between them, ending their daily fights. But that is another long story. Tonight, our lamp only shines this far. The shadow of the pagoda rests against the wall, and the scent of lotus lingers over the distant water. My fate is mine, not heaven's. That line isn't actually in the original book, Investiture of the Gods. It came from later storytellers, but it stuck firmly to this boy. This saying was passed down through generations, because in every generation, there's always a voice like that. It stands up high, speaks with steady confidence, and tells you to accept the path already laid out for you. Sometimes, that voice comes from home. While the bowl on the dinner table is still steaming, the person sitting across from you has already chosen your path, your destination, and who you ought to be. Sometimes those voices come from outside. Everyone on the street is moving in one direction, and someone turns to hurry you along. They say there's only one path, so don't just stand there staring. Other voices settle inside your heart over time. Late at night, when no one is around, they keep telling you that you have no other choice and that you were only ever meant to be this way. The answer this child gave was not gentle. He didn't ask anyone to take back their words, nor did he wait for fate to show mercy. He took what he didn't want and set it right back on the table. The identity they gave him, he could return it. The debts they forced on him, he could return those too. But with every single thing he gave back, he gained another scar. Giving it back wasn't the same as running away. When you run, you keep looking back, afraid someone is chasing you. But he cut off the old path with his own hands and shut the door behind him for good. The price was as clear and painful as cutting off his own flesh. He knew just how cold the blade was and how warm his blood felt on the stone. He never pretended it didn't hurt. It was like a lone soul crossing the mountains all by itself. No hand to hold, no house to enter. Night dew covered the pine branches. The world was huge, but nowhere felt like home. But when the lotus opened up again and he stood back up, that old debt was completely gone. The wind blew over his new shoulders, and no one could ever take his breath away again. A lotus isn't made in a golden palace. Its roots are buried deep in the mud, enduring cold water and dark nights every single day before a clean flower finally blooms on the water. It isn't a gift that just appears out of thin air. Deep in the pond, the roots push down on their own, and the stem reaches up. When rain falls, it bows its head, and when the sun shines, it opens its petals once more. I love this child, mostly because he never pretended to be invincible. He was playful and reckless, churning up the deep sea and making terrible mistakes in a single moment. He wasn't a perfect hero sitting high on an altar. Sand clung to his shoes, salt dusted his clothes, and though he held magical weapons, his face still bore a child's stubborn pride. When he made a mistake, he faced the consequences, but there was one thing he refused to accept. He would never let others dictate his life just because of how he was born. He felt pain too, and he lost those he leaned on. Yet when the pagoda pressed down and spears blocked his path, he still stood upon his fiery wheels, refusing to hand his life back to anyone. He destroyed his old self and returned reborn from a lotus flower. When he woke, he was still that hot-tempered, imperfect child, but he no longer carried the flesh and blood given by his parents. As the fire wheels spun up beside the pond, twin beams of light lit up the lotus leaves. Water droplets rolled into the center and slipped over the edge, leaving no trace, never turning back. That line, "My fate is mine, not heaven's," rests under tonight's lamp like his golden ring. It doesn't need to strike out. Just sitting quietly on the table, it carries a heavy weight. The ancient tale of the Investiture of the Gods recorded this war of gods and demons. Over the years, opera stages, storytellers, and legends kept adding new life to the story. Some details faded as time went by, but the sword left in the courtyard, the spirit soaring over the roof, and the blooming lotus in the pond have never lost their color. If you too carry burdens that don't belong to you, there's no rush to find an answer tonight. Just listen to the wind over the roof tiles and watch the candle wax slowly drip down. Maybe in your dreams, a lotus leaf holds up the moonlight, dark mud beneath it, a clear drop of water on top. Far off in the distance, two sparks of fire glide through the morning mist. Our story ends tonight, right by the lotus pond. The lamp wick is still glowing, and a gentle ripple lingers on the water. Next time, we'll light another lamp. We'll open an old book and follow someone new as they walk their long road through the wind and moon. Close your eyes now. May the roof outside stay quiet and the breeze by your pillow be gentle. The lotus has closed its petals and the fiery wheels have drifted far away. Good night.